Assassin's Promise by Thomas Woodward. Chapter 97. Millie drove the horses forward. She had just passed the rocky formation that led into the low hills over the endless stretch of desert. The hard-packed trail had dwindled to nothing. Now she plodded the horses on through ripples of sand in an unending sea. Beyond the rocks, a muddy patch came into view. It may not be an oasis, but perhaps there was water there somewhere. As the hills slipped by, her breath caught. A huge encampment of wooden structures had been erected less than a mile ahead of them. She saw figures milling in a central area, fine wagons huddled in an immense semicircle. A man on horseback, scarcely more than a dot, started moving away in earnest before disappearing over a rise. They had been seen. She prayed the group was non-threatening. Her memories lashed together, and she found herself recalling scant images of their harrowing ordeal. She did not want to die. She had to alert the others. "Kayana! Irna! I see people! Hundreds of them!" Irna ducked out past the dirt flap, and she heard Kayana stir heavily, some very colorful words coming from her mouth before she cut them off. The tapestry of the scene continued to extend as they gained ground on the encampment. Dozens of people seemed to be milling about, moving from one wagon to the next in the great circular open area. Many wagons held small pavilions on their roofs. The wooden beams that created the larger portion of the man-made structures rose high, several stories. She could see odd colors flitting about like leaves, all about the double and triple-decked wooden terraces. Millie held her excitement in. The merchant gathering! This must be it! As they drew nearer, she could see a line of tents extending in either direction from the central group of wagons. The tents were striped and brightly dyed. A multitude of colors created a sharp contrast to the bleak desert backdrop. Strong-legged dark stallions stood tethered near a makeshift stable near one of the end of the gathering space. Roan geldings and smaller dappled ponies filled out the stalls as they passed by. Millie could see a delegation of young men and a few women, servants from the look of them, stepping forward in their direction to meet the newcomers. The men were garbed in lightly colored silks that were gossamer thin. The women were garbed much the same, but also had dark shawls wrapped about them, covering most of their facial features save their eyes. Millie could see far beyond, to a grouping of merchants that stood together in a tight knot. One of the men was gesturing in their direction casually. She could make out fine jewelry that each merchant wore. They seemed to be dipped in burnished gold, silver, and bronze. The sunlight caught the finery even from a distance. "Kayana, there's men approaching our wagon." Millie fought to keep calm. "I see them, Millie. I will not let them harm you." Kayana fingered the hilt of her sword lightly, although she didn't think they were in immediate danger. The young men and women that approached them now did not carry any visible weapons. Irna held her children close. "Zana, fetch Mael! Quickly, child!" She moved her hands in a series of movements, then gestured to her other daughter. Silently, Sana stood for a moment, then slowly moved to gather her younger sister. The rumpled doll hung limply from the crook of her elbow. It was tattered and dirty. The doll must have been mended dozens of times in the past. Island waved his arms mildly, giggling at the approaching group. Irna held him close to her breast, protectively covering him with her arms. She looked fierce. Millie jumped down, unable to contain her excitement longer. "Look, Kayana! They come bearing gifts for us!" Millie began to dash forward, sprinting over the hot sand on her bare feet. Kayana followed the child, easily loping behind her, keeping pace. She wiped her face of any expression, leaving it carefully blank. The two of them met the delegation about halfway in between where the wagon rested and the entrance to the encampment. Their two horses whinnied nervously, tossing their heads to one side. A young man approached alone, bowing ceremoniously, lowering a dark drape of cloth onto the sand that separated the two groups. He maintained his supplicated stance, waiting for Millie to inspect the gift. Millie bent down, but hesitated before reaching the cloth. As she began to move her hand gingerly towards the dark cloth, it began to writhe in the sunlight, a diamond-patterned head of a snake emerging silently from the folds of the fabric. Its forked tongue flickered out, tasting the air. Millie froze, barely keeping a scream from her lips. A sharp tsk sounded from behind her as Kayana froze as well. Kayana inched closer to Millie, moving on silent feet. The snake began to undulate before them, wrapping its heavy coils around the fabric, coming more into view. The servant raised himself up from his bow, an open smile on his face. A gift from our masters. They favor you with the three-eyed god. If you are strong, be fast and take your prize. Do not show fear. It is more ancient than antiquity, and will see through your guise. Its kiss is death, but its blood gives eternal life. So say the ancestors of our people. The young man motioned carefully to the serpent, and again to Millie. Do not show fear, child. The other men and women formed a semicircle around them in a hush. Millie looked again to the serpent. It moved lazily in the sun, coiling itself in a wide circle around the dark fabric that it now mostly covered. The snake met her gaze and wavered its head back and forth, side to side. The tempo was mesmerizing. Millie kept eye contact with the creature. Its eyes shone with intelligence and were ancient, far more ancient than she thought possible. Sweat beaded on her brow as she maintained eye contact. With breathtaking slowness, she inched one arm forward, ever so slightly. She could see the snake quiver, flicking its tongue in a strange rhythm. Then, without warning, it struck, moving faster than lightning, bearing heavy fangs and moving within an inch of her face. Its bluff almost stopped her heart as it beat frantically in her chest. She had not broken eye contact. The serpent held it still, its large diamond-patterned head swaying back and forth, less than a breath in front of her. Kayana trembled next to Millie. She could almost feel the older woman's fear. Part of Millie was terrified, but another greater part of her was intoxicated in the puzzle that sat larger than life before her. Something moved beyond the group of servants, from the periphery of her vision, and her eyes followed it for a moment. The serpent moved again. She felt the scales of its head brush her cheek before she wrenched her gaze back to meet it. Its gaping maw stood in front of her, long fangs dripping with a clear liquid onto the sand in front of her. Its eyes still focused on her, predatory, unwavering. If she looked away again, it would strike, and its touch would mean death. With breathtaking slowness, Millie inched her palm forward, careful to keep eye contact with the hissing serpent that swayed mere millimeters from her face, its fangs dripping venom. She could see the strange diamond pattern on the hood of the serpent, continuing down its heavy scaled length. The pattern was situated in such a way that it looked like there was a third eye, between the two malevolent orbs that seemed to stare into her soul. She could see the snake tense as she began to move her arm forward. Sweat beaded on her forehead and began to drip into her eyes. She forced herself to keep staring at the snake through the distractions. Its forked tongue flickered, just missing her. Millie could hear Kayana's tensed breathing. Clearly the woman did not want to disturb her, lest the snake strike in a moment of weakness. Gathering her courage, Millie continued to inch her arm forward, her skin meeting soft scales that undulated under her touch. The serpent's head dipped for just a moment, as if considering whether to attack this new threat, before returning its gaze to her. The gentle swaying lulled her, the mesmerizing patterns and movements seeming to blur together. Her focus began to give way. Then, in a firm move, Millie grasped the serpent. The snake's jaws sprang open, and it hissed terribly before going utterly still. Surprised, Millie almost dropped the deadly reptile. Taking her other hand, she grasped the immense serpent and lifted it like a rag doll, fixing her gaze on the group of servants. A murmur of awe rose as they quietly backed away in a hush. When Millie looked down at her hands, she was holding a long cord of dark silk, Strange patterns glinted in the light. The fabric almost had a life of its own, so keen was its make. Millie carefully folded the fabric, taking special care not to let go entirely. Her eyes seemed to be playing tricks on her. Kayana hugged her, but fastened a careful eye on the shifting cloth. Millie raised the folded material and moved it to hand it back to the servants. No, this is yours now. As I said, it is a gift. You are welcome to our tents. The three-eyed god has given you his favor. You may travel with us as long as you like. We will rush ahead to tell of what has happened here to our masters. It is an honor to meet you, and Kinder. The other servants bowed low at his word, and then backed away for a span of feet before turning and quickly moving towards the tents. Millie's hands shook. Her hands were still gripping the silk in a white-knuckled fists. I am proud of you today, Millie. Kayana hugged her like a sister, raising her in the air. She was careful, however, not to touch the fabric, which Millie still clutched tightly. Kayana, what happened there? The snake. It was right here a moment ago. Where did it go? Surely it must have slithered away when I looked up. Kayana met her gaze without speaking, and slowly Millie realized what she had feared. The snake had not gone at all. She still clutched it within her grasp. If she let go of the fabric, would it transform and come to kill her? She didn't know. She would have to let go of it eventually. Millie was too terrified of the prospect to make any sudden moves. Child, what have you done? Irna's voice was faint with fear. Do not bring demons upon us. Millie turned to meet Irna's eyes and saw fear there, and revulsion. Millie took a step towards the woman. Do not come any closer to me. Irna shifted her eyes to her children, her gaze suddenly widening in realization. No! Eileen, stay away from them. Come to your mother. Yes, come back to me, child. The little toddler had a curious expression on his face and was smiling at Millie. He turned in a slow circle, looking at the adults standing in a circle around him. Millie backed away from the child. Kayana, I don't want to scare them. Please, if I am cursed, let the children keep their distance from me. Kayana moved closely to Irna, her expression dangerously blank. I will see that you are cared for. You and your children. Never say another word about Millie. Kayana stared at Irna for a long time until the other woman broke from her gaze. Irna backed away, eyes wild. You are cursed! Cursed! You took my Kellen from me. I will never forgive you. I could have killed you when I saw you. I should have slit both of your necks in your sleep. Irna started a feverish laugh. I will curse you both until my dying day. I wish I had never seen you before. Kayana slapped the woman once. The cuff caused Irna to cut off mid-sentence. Irna raised a hand to her cheek, her eyes still wild. You have my gratitude, Kayana said, for tending to our ills. Now move. I will see you and yours are cared for. I will see it done. You have no right to strike me, vile woman, cur! The second slap left Irna senseless. She staggered to rise, seeing that Kayana waited above her like a silent arbiter. Kayana waited, her face blank. Even the most stubborn child would learn eventually. She had herself been equally stubborn once. She remembered her teacher, Nazan, his indomitable expression, brows tightly knit together in concentration or consternation, as was more often the case when she was his student. She would at most receive one-word responses for her troubles. Again! Often there was no response at all. The stubborn child often had to bring themselves to acceptance. Pain was the most common teacher. She felt pity for Irna, for what the woman had been through. She mourned the loss of her husband, a good man. None of these things mattered in accepting reality. a reality that she must accept for the sake of her children's livelihoods, if not for her own. Kayana knew that what the woman needed now, most now, was an enemy, one that would not back down and allow Irna to stand up for herself. She waited. There. She could see a sliver of the defiance creep back up into the woman's features. After a long moment, the woman stood, unaided. Irna met Kayana's stare with cold defiance, stronger than before. She would need that strength to carry on in the hard days to come. Kayana waited for her to turn and slowly walk back towards the wagon. Not beaten, but alive again for the first time since the loss of her husband. Truly alive. Hate would do for now. Like Kayana's teachers, she would accept any emotion so long as it drove her forward and produced results. The unwilling stone rolled down the mountain just as quickly as another. What she needed was to take the first great step, a painful step, separating herself from all those around her, realizing that she could not depend on anyone else to protect her children. Not truly. Save her own wits. Kayana would see that she get help, if such was possible from among the great merchant caravan. But the gift she gave Irna today would sustain her when the rest fell away. Millie stood close with Kayana, watching the 30-odd-year-old woman leave the two of them. Irna seemed to have aged rapidly over the last span of days. The softness about her had all but evaporated. Kayana, I'm afraid to set this down. What if the snake returns? Millie looked worried. And when it does, you will be ready. What if I falter or lose my concentration? Then you will come face to face with what you fear, and you must trust your instincts. Kayana met Millie's gaze steadily before brightening into a small smile. Come, let us go to the tents. Perhaps we can see if they can arrange transport for us to the far coast. After what you did today, your honor will be great in their eyes. Strike now before the iron cools, and I will teach you another pose. With a twinkle to her eye, Kayana led Millie back towards their wagon. The long strip of billowing cloth danced in strange patterns in the hot wind. Millie's knuckles relaxed slightly, but neither did she let go of the fabric.